Some of the most imaginative films of the last few decades share a common connection. You might not notice right away. Behind creatures, armor, props and inventions is Weta Workshop. Weta Workshop began in Wellington, New Zealand as a small creative collective formed by Richard Taylor, Tanya Roger and a handful of collaborators who approached filmmaking through practical craft rather than big facility structure. Their early work came from a desire to build things for films that didn't have the budget for large-scale effects, and that scrappy environment shaped the way the workshop operated in the first years. The company grew alongside Peter Jackson's early films because those projects needed a team willing to experiment, improvise, and build unconventional effects. Jackson and Taylor developed a working rhythm where ideas flowed quickly between director and workshop, and that rhythm became the basis for how the company would later handle massive productions. As Weta Workshop expanded, it retained the collaborative core that defined its early days. Instead of separating disciplines into isolated units, sculptors, painters, engineers, and fabricators worked in shared spaces, allowing problems to be solved through conversation rather than formal paperwork. And then the Lord of the Rings arrived.
Weta Workshop was kind of like visiting some wild fantasy land. It's like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory but without the candy.
I went to the Weta Workshop, which is quite unlike anything I've ever seen in my entire career.
This trilogy marked the company's global arrival. It required designs, armory, weapons, prosthetics, miniatures, and physical builds across every part of its high fantasy world, and the workshop built department after department to handle the growing workload. The trilogy served as a proof that the studio at the edge of the world could support a project of this size. Designers Alan Lee and John Howe became key contributors during The Lord of the Rings, providing artwork that grounded the visual direction of the trilogy. Their partnership with Weta Workshop helped unify the films across departments because the concepts they created were translated directly into models, sculptures, and physical builds that influenced the entire production. During this period, Richard Taylor's leadership became defined by his direct problem-solving rather than corporate distance. He encouraged artists to adapt techniques from other crafts, experiment with materials, and find solutions that matched the needs of each scene. This kept the workshop flexible even as it grew in size. Weta Workshop built a process where it meets the directors, writers, and production designers early in development. These meetings focus on what can be built, how it can be filmed, and how actors will interact with the sets, objects, or suits.
I always think of us film technicians as actually tool makers for storytellers. So we look into exactly what they're trying to convey, and then we break down what's needed in order for them to tell their story appropriately.
This early involvement helps guide both the workshop and the rest of the production into shared visual direction. When a film enters pre-production, the workshop receives early concepts, scripts, and director's notes. From there, the internal art department begins sketching, sculpting miniatures, and presenting early prototypes to the production designer and the cinematographer. These early phases help clarify what will be built and how it will function on set. The physical prototypes give camera teams the ability to evaluate scale, color, and form before the final concepts are approved. Production designers use these prototypes to adjust sets, costumes, and props so that everything aligns with the visual style of the film. This stage becomes a continuous conversation between departments. Directors often travel to the workshop to approve sculptures, test the creature looks, inspect armory, and evaluate how performers move inside suits. These visits help directors understand how the physical builds will influence acting, blocking, and camera choices. Once builds move toward completion, the workshop collaborates with costume departments to ensure that materials allow proper movement, comfort, and stunt safety. The pieces are tested for heat, weight, and durability so performers can work for long hours on set. Makeup and prosthetics teams coordinate with cinematographers to ensure that materials behave as planned under different lighting conditions. Skin tones, surface finishes, and fine details must remain consistent under close-up photography, which requires extensive testing. The miniatures team works closely with the director of photography to align scales with lens selection, depth of field, and planned motion control shots. These tests determine how the miniature will interact with full-scale footage once compositing begins. During production, on-set Weta Workshop crews handle maintenance, repairs, fittings, and emergency fixes. They work with assistant directors, stunt coordinators, and camera teams to keep props and suits consistent from scene to scene. These on-set crews also adapt quickly when directors request last-minute changes. The workshop's flexible workflow allows them to adjust builds without slowing down the shooting, something productions rely on heavily when schedules become tight. Weta Workshop contributed to films like The Hobbit, King Kong, Avatar, District 9, The Chronicles of Narnia, Hellboy, and many others. Each film used the workshop differently depending on whether the emphasis was creatures, costumes, props, or large-scale physical environments. On King Kong, the workshop created Skull Island creatures, physical props, and miniature environments that blended with digital work.
He wanted us to do was to create Skull Island so that it looked just like the 1933 film, but that we were just there with better cameras.
Sequences like this have to have a strange balance of reality and stylization. You're always wanting the visual effects to be as real as possible, but on the other hand, I want Skull Island to be unreal.
These pieces gave performers and camera operators concrete elements to interact with during filming. For District 9, Weta Workshop built alien weapons, suits, and practical pieces that supported Neil Blomkamp's grounded documentary-style approach. The physical builds helped performers respond naturally during handheld shooting. In The Chronicles of Narnia, the workshop blended costume design with creature effects, producing suits and prosthetics that allowed extended performances under difficult shooting conditions. The results show how physical builds can support long-form acting instead of quick, restrictive shots. The workshop's work isn't limited to film. It creates material for television, exhibitions, museum displays, and collectibles, each requiring its own adaptations while maintaining the same attention to craft. Richard Taylor continues to guide the workshop's direction, keeping the company grounded in creative collaboration. His approach emphasizes work ethic, cross-department learning, and openness to experimentation rather than hierarchies. Many of the workshop's well-known artists began as junior builders who advanced by developing new techniques during demanding productions. This internal progression keeps the company's culture tied to craft rather than administration. The close connection between Weta Workshop and WETA Digital, now known as Weta Effects, especially during the Peter Jackson collaborations, allowed physical and digital teams to communicate constantly. That communication created a workflow where physical builds directly influence digital interpretations. Even though Weta Workshop is known for physical builds, their work carries into post-production because digital artists often use the workshop's physical pieces as reference for texture, scale, color, and surface detail. When a prop, creature, or miniature is scanned or photographed, these images help digital teams to keep the final shots consistent with what was used on set, which makes the digital vision feel grounded and easier for the director to approve. During post-production, artists stayed in contact with the VFX supervisor to answer questions about materials, movement, and how certain pieces were meant to function. That back and forth helps compositors, animators, and digital modelers match lighting, wear, and physical behavior in scenes that blend practical and digital elements. The goal is to make the finished shoot feel like one unified moment, not a stack of separate components. The integration was clear in Avatar, where physical prototypes helped digital artists build consistent designs. The workshop created props, weapons, and creature maquettes that helped performers during motion capture and gave digital teams a visual guide. Later, these pieces were scanned and digitized to be incorporated in the CGI designs of the movie, where the workshop's approach supports the director's intent by giving clear information on what can be built, how long it will take, and how the final piece will interact with the camera, stunts, and performance. Production designers rely on the workshop to turn drawings into physical objects with proper proportions, finishes, and durability. This helps unify the film's world building and helps the actors' performance when they interact with the sets, props, costumes, and feel more connected to the character. The workshops performs continual testing on materials, joints, finishes, and durability. The tests prevent failures during filming, especially during action scenes or long prosthetic days. Cinematographers often request lighting samples to evaluate how materials respond on camera. Adjustments are made based on glare, reflection, surface color, and wear. All departments contribute feedback to keep the builds consistent throughout shooting. This creates a loop where craft, camera, stunts, and direction influence each other in real time. Over the years, Weta Workshop earned its place as a studio that brings physical craft to the films that lean heavily on world building. Directors trust the workshop because it adapts to each production rather than forcing projects into fixed pipelines. Today, Weta Workshop continues operating as a creative hub where artists collaborate closely with filmmakers to bring physical elements to the screen, supporting productions with builds that anchor performances and camera work in real-world detail. This was everything for today, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment, share and like. This was Cinema Essay, and see you next time.